computer. Cool. You'll all have to click a button that kind of acknowledges that. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming along tonight. This is the inaugural public discussion of PrEP, talking about what we're offering for next year. We're obviously looking both for registrars to take part in the training program, but also business owners who want to support the registrars in the training program. We're not specifically looking to recruit registrars to benchmark at least as far as our planning goes, we're full at this stage. So it really is it's an external training program. I really want to welcome this evening Dr. Vanessa Spiller, who has been with us for several years, but has actually been with me on the outcomes journey for closer to 15 years. Vanessa is one of our team leaders here at Benchmark, and she's actually put together the bulk of this presentation about what are the things that you want to be aware of when you're choosing where you want to be next year and what makes a good registrar program, and what will actually put you that step ahead to, as she said, hit the road running. So I'll hand over to Vanessa and I'll just pop my head in every now and then to say things.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And we're going to do a bit of a tag team effort tonight. And, you know, fortunately, we're a nice small group. So, you know, there's going to be plenty of opportunity to have a talk at the end. And if you've got any questions. And I guess our plan for the evening is also to not just sort of talk about, I guess, the PrEP and the program we're doing, but also talking about this, the next step in your psychology career that you're about to launch into, because I think both of us can remember back to a time when, well, vaguely remember back to a time when we were at that point of graduating, and things had been, you know, nicely set out up until that point, and you kind of knew what you were doing for at least 2 years, and then all of a sudden you're at the end, and it was like, oh gosh, you know, where do I go now, and what does that entail? So I think both of us have some experience with, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly with that, and just what a confusing time that can be. So I guess our plan for tonight is really to step you through a whole range of things that are related to, you know, finishing up your degree and then jumping into the big wide world of psychology. The first thing I guess I want to do, though, is just to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're sitting. We're up here in Brisbane, and we sit on the land of the Turrbal and the Yagara people. But I know that we have people from all around the place who are joining us. So I just want to pay my respects to you know, elders past, present, and emerging. So as I said, we're going to cover a variety of sort of topics tonight. And I guess that, as Aaron's already alluded to, you know, we have probably some clear ideas about what we think makes a good registrar program and what we think makes a good experience for people who are coming out. And of course, we both come from a feedback informed perspective as well. So we won't bang on about that too much tonight. That's something we'll save for another talk. But that's kind of the format that we're coming from. So I guess that there's a few areas, as I said, that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the fact that you know, we're in a very different space for people graduating from their master's programs than, you know, we were 5 years ago even, or definitely 10 years ago, and a very long way from where we were when I was graduating from my master's. And I think that some of the things that we don't cover in master's courses is, you know, what happens when you do graduate? What are the kind of issues that you're likely to face, particularly when you're starting out in terms of looking for work, and work looks quite different to maybe what it did earlier on. The pathways were a little bit sort of clearer, and people went down very specific pathway of maybe getting into a government job. But we're in a very different space now. And we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, finding a job and helping to find, I guess, a situation that actually, you know, is is about what works for you and where to go, maybe the kind of areas that you want to avoid. And we probably have a few stories, but we don't want to scare people either. And then running through, obviously, registrar options, because there's actually a number of ways in which you can get the needs of your registrar years and getting your endorsement met in a number of different ways. So I guess we just want people to know what those various ways are. And I guess we have a particular way in mind as well with the program that we've put together. Anything you want to add there, Aaron, even at this early stage about what we're going to cover tonight?
No, I think that's a really great starting point to just think about what are the big decisions that you've got to make in terms of work. What are the pros and cons, and also, not wanting to be negative, but what are some of the things that can go wrong, and hopefully some pitfalls that can be easily avoided by walking in with your eyes wide open.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so if we start to talk about the landscape of psychology graduates, I think I kind of alluded to the fact that, when I was graduating from my degree, what tended to happen was that you finished your degree and most people went into some kind of government position, and that was a really great training down because you had sort of lots of peers around you, or your supervision was covered, or your professional development was looked after by your organisation. And for, I guess, 99% of people, certainly that I know, that was the path they went. Almost nobody, it was quite unheard of for people to end up in their first job in private practice, but that is certainly not the climate that we're in anymore. So again, psychology graduates, you guys are very much moving into a market that is desperate for your services, and where there are an abundance of positions that are available. And so you're going to be really thinking more about, what is the right kind of position for me? What's the right kind of job that's going to help me get the skills that I need? Where am I going to find, support? How am I going to get the most out of, these first couple of years where I'm finding my way in the profession? So finding a job is not going to be one of the key issues. It's really going to be finding the job that's going to be the best fit for you.
You will all be beating off potential employers with a stick. Yeah. The job market at the moment is completely different. It really is a case of multiple jobs for one or two applicants. So you can afford to be a little bit choosy at this point in time.
Absolutely. And you may already be in that situation. You actually may have already been offered some positions once your registration comes through. That wouldn't surprise me at all. So we're going to run through, what we would suggest that you consider. And we'll also talk a little bit about the specifics around endorsement. And I guess one of the key things that we think is really important, because we've both heard, some of those horror stories about, new registrars, unfortunately, working 10, 11-hour days and feeling incredibly burnt out. They've just come out of uni and they're exhausted from that, and they land in their first job and they feel like they're working in a salt mine, and they're being extracted for every hour of their day. So we want to really help people avoid those kind of situations. So, in terms of what does the right position look like? And I guess this is, Aaron again is going to jump in and out with me here, but I guess, there is no right position overall. This is something that obviously is going to be a little bit different for everyone, but I think there's some really key considerations you want to take into to account. And those, they're not just considerations that are around, increasing your skills and becoming the best clinician you can be, but also about helping you to get actual work-life balance. And I know at university, there's even, you might have done a topic on self-care that they squeezed in. And having worked at a university, my guess is they squeezed it in when you guys were looking like you're about to fall dead off your seats. So I'll squeeze that in. But, it really is possible to get work-life balance. And so, how do you jump into that and pick a position that's going to work for you? So one of the things I think that is often at the top of the list, and it is really high on the list, even though it's probably not the most important decision that you'll make. And that's obviously around money and income. And, this is the first time you're going to be jumping into actually being paid for your labour, which I think is an exciting time. And you want to find something that, reflects both your training and your experience. But I guess the other thing you're really going to be facing is looking at jumping either into a salaried position or into like a subcontracting position. And there really is sort of pros and cons to both of those sort of positions. So
Can I just quickly highlight the other option there too, Vanessa, which is probably one I wouldn't recommend, but that's the room rental one.
Yeah, absolutely.
The local GP surgery says $50 a day, you can have the room. And I think from a remuneration point of view, that's probably the most profitable way to do things. But there's lots of pitfalls with that. You might find that the GP surgery wants you to bulk bill everybody, or you might find that the expectation is that you're seeing 8 clients a day, or you're seeing 16 clients a day in half-an-hour sessions. So that room rental arrangement is definitely, or can be, the most financially lucrative. But I would probably consider that that's if you're 10 years out and you're, looking for something that's just a little bit quieter, that's an option to consider there. So I agree with you, Vanessa. The two that we should probably be thinking about are the salary model and then the contractor model.
Yeah. And look, I guess the other option is going out on your own right from the beginning. But again,
some people are doing that.
Probably on the balance of things, there's a lot to learn. So that's probably not your greatest option at this point in time. So, so some of the pros of obviously a salaried position is, while you, and again, correct me, Aaron, if I'm wrong here, but typically you might be looking at a lower hourly rate. But what you're getting with that is a stable, predictable income with all of your leave entitlements, your super, your tax requirements that have been taken care of. Someone else is sort of looking and making sure you're meeting that. And you're also being paid, at least in theory, for every hour of work that you perform, and not just the hours that clients are sitting in front of you. So I think that's something to sort of take into consideration.
One of the real mistakes that is easy to make about salary is to look at the hourly rate and go, I'm being offered $45 an hour or $55 an hour or $65 an hour. That's not that much more than the $25 an hour that I was earning at such and such. But remember, that's every hour. And over the course of a year, every hour of every week, that $1 difference or $2 difference actually does add up. So it's really important when you look at a salaried position, you've got to look at the per annum. Is this a $60,000 job, a $70,000 job, a $100,000 job, a $150,000 job? Try not to fixate on that hourly rate because it can be somewhat deceptive. It really is that per annum figure that you need to look at under those circumstances.
Yeah, particularly with all of the sort of the benefits and entitlements that
Absolutely.
get built into it, where they're kind of the part of the bread and butter about what makes those salaried positions really quite attractive often.
I just want to very quickly for those of you, and this is just me, right? Like when I first took a registrar job, I'd never actually had a full-time job. I'd worked as a casual, so you work 3 hours and you get paid 3 hours. The thing about full-time, for those of you who've never actually had a full-time job, first off, superannuation, which is amazing. And secondly, and I still don't fully understand this, even as an employer and even 20 years later, this fascinating concept of leave loading, that when you go on leave, you actually get paid more to not be there. then you got paid to be there, which again goes back to that point. You've really got to look at what is the total package for salary, and is your super covered? Actually, your super has to be covered legally, but what rate of super are you getting? What entitlements are you getting? And what is the total package there? Sorry, Vanessa, I cut you off.
No, that's all good. It's all very relevant. And look, I mean, there's other little bits and pieces again that you may be not thinking of, and you may not be at this phase in your life yet. But when it comes to applying for a home loan or a car loan, and they want pay slips, as someone who's worked for themselves as well as worked for another organisation, I can tell you it's certainly a lot easier when you're working for another organisation and you have all of that tax information. So it's just a minor thing, but I guess many people are actually heading into that phase of their life where that stuff's important.
Yep.
You're also going to get a certain amount typically of supervision and professional development that's actually built into the arrangement. So, you're going to have to ask and work out from your employer exactly how much that is, and to make sure it's going to cover the needs for your registrar period. But typically when you're in a salaried position, that is, a big part of what you're offered as well.
Yep. And if you're not, then you need to kind of subtract that from the salary position. So if you are required to do 40 hours of supervision and they're offering you 10 hours of supervision, then suddenly that $120,000 position is 30 hours multiplied by $150 to $200 less in terms of factoring it all in. So I guess the really important thing that we're highlighting here, for salary, you really need to look at the detail. What are your entitlements? What's included? But importantly, what's not included, and what are you going to have to reach into your own pocket to do? And I think the same is true, but actually it's a little bit more complicated in the contractor world. Vanessa, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure do. And we're going to jump into subcontracting. Again, it's got its pros and its cons, and certainly when you look at subcontracting hourly rates, they're going to look higher, and sometimes they actually look really good, particularly an hourly rate thing. And what that means though is that your total income is really going to depend on how many clients you actually see, because you're actually being paid for the clients that you see, and the not for every hour that you work. And that means you actually end up with a fair bit of variability from week to week and month to month. The other thing with the subcontracting is that we typically need to negotiate the split that you're getting with the person you're subcontracting for. And I don't know about you, but certainly my psychology training gave me almost no skills in negotiating. Most of us are, pretty nervous, I think, around doing that stuff. It's not something we do very often. So that is something that you'll need to do. You also need to be really organized if you're going down this route. So you need to be able to keep track of your own taxes, your super quite often. You need to make plans for your leave period where you're not going to have an income during that time. So, you need to think ahead around that. You also need to think about registering for GST, whether or not you'll be a sole trader entity, or whether you're going to be a PTY Ltd, a company. And often in subcontracting positions, the supervision and the professional development may not be included in that. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's done in some kind of part. You do part and I'll do part arrangement. But you're going to have to ask about the details and make sure you know what is included and what's not included. Theoretically, when you're working as a subcontractor, you're going to have more flexibility. But I say that theoretically, again, as someone who has, worked for themselves, which is a little bit like being a subcontractor, you still have obligations to your clients, which means that, certainly the flexibility you think you might get doesn't end up being as super flexible as you anticipated. So, in general, I think this subcontracting pathway is actually, it's not a bad option, but you really need to think about, again, your personal qualities. So if you're someone who is really good at being super organized, if you're really good at putting boundaries in place, this can be a good option for you.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to highlight just on the income front with subcontracting is you've got to work on a reality basis rather than an optimistic basis. So let me walk through some fairly simple math. Let's say industry standard is 60-40. We do see a lot of registrar positions that are 50-50 if they include all of your training, all of your supervision. That's not uncommon, but 60-40 is a fairly standard split. Let's say the practice is charging $200 an hour. That means you should be making $120 per client that you see. Let's say you see 5 clients a day. You're now making $600. Let's say you're working 5 days a week. You're making $3,000. Let's say you're working 4 weeks a year. 4 weeks a month. That's $12,000. 12 months, that's $144,000. And you're like, I'm making $144,000 a year. Why would I possibly consider that $95,000 salary position? There's a couple of things to consider here. Firstly, there's no way that you're going to see 30 clients a week. You will burn out. Secondly, there's no way, even if you do book all of those 30 clients a week, they're all going to turn up. What are the cancellation rates? What are the no-show rates? What are the bulk billing rates? What normally happens in December? What normally happens in January? I know from our statistics, typically December is a downturn of about 30%. There's that week off, which accounts for about 25%. And then there's another 10% dip leading up to December. There's also typically a 50 to 75% drop off in January. January is a disaster. You can also expect to see June or July, whenever we go back from COVID, there will be some nasty rotavirus or flu that is going to take out all of your clients or all of your clients with kids over the course of June or July. So those particular months will see a big downturn. The other thing or one of the other mistakes that I see people making in this space is that they fixate on the percentage. It's like, all right, well, I've got to negotiate for the highest percentage. The highest percentage, and I think it's okay to name names here, the highest percentage in Australia is Headspace. You can go and get a job for Headspace tomorrow, 80%. However, that's 80% of a bulk billing rate. So that 80% is as a clinical psychology registrar, so remember you're on the generalist rate, it's about $90. 80% of $90 is coming down fairly significantly. And then when you take into consideration that half of those clients are going to no-show, you might be sitting in a situation where you're actually earning less than you were when you were working your uni job at McDonald's or shelf packing or whatever. I've actually seen a number of psychologists who are earning the equivalent of early $20 an hour when that math is actually done. So with contracting, it's really, really important that you look realistically at what are your outgoings, because they're going to be a lot higher. You look realistically at your income, because it's going to be a lot lower than whatever the Excel spreadsheet tells you it should be. And then look realistically at all of the places where things might not pan out exactly the way that you expect. So really important if you're going to enter into contracting, and I don't want to discourage anybody from subcontracting, but you need to walk in asking all of these questions, and actually, Vanessa, you're about to talk about some of these questions now.
Yeah. So the next bit is really around client load. And I think when you come out, you're usually pretty excited to finally be seeing clients. I think, this is what most of you have been working for. It's just like, oh, I can't wait to actually see people. This is what I've been wanting to do. But you've got to remember, I think this is a really important thing to determine with whatever working arrangement you're with, whether that's with a salary position and what their expectations of how many clients you see in a day, how many clients you see in a week, or whether you're subcontracting and you're the person who's making those decisions about how many you see. The thing I would suggest you really take into account is, when you're starting out, it's not just seeing clients. It really is starting to learn the paperwork and all of the processes, particularly if you're doing subcontracting around Medicare, letters to GPs. There's a whole lot of that behind the scenes stuff that it isn't rocket science, but it does take a while to get that under your belt. It takes a while to get yourself really familiar with it and really comfortable with it. And we also know that, you know, in those early days when we're starting to see people, you're typically doing a little more planning and a little more research for your clients. And so you really just need to make sure that you're looking across the length of a working week to make sure that you don't end up working 10 hours a day. So, you know, really, you know, think about, you know, what would be a reasonable workload and a manageable workload while you're getting up to speed with all of those background things. And as well as just getting fit for work. You know, it may have been a while, or you may have never been in a position where you're working 40 hours a week. It's actually kind of exhausting, and it can probably take a good few months, up to a year. I see it a lot in teachers. That first year, they're just exhausted because of, you know, that mental load of adjusting to doing something new. So, you know, really be careful about what kind of expectations of client numbers that they're at, you know, and typically you're probably going to see expectations of somewhere between about 5 to 7 clients per day. So if you have an employee who's expecting you to see more than that, you probably really need to think about the burnout factor.
All right, should we move on to the actual registrar requirements, Vanessa?
I just want to make sort of one more point is just around that registrar period, which, you know, we know that's going to take you about 2 years, but not all organisations are necessarily going to see that as their responsibility. So I guess this is, you know, when you're going into to be interviewed for a position, I really recommend that you guys are doing the interviewing as well, and particularly around the registrar requirements and what it is that they're going to bring to the table. So some of the things that you might want to ask them around that is like, you know, have they taken on a registrar before? You know, is this a process that they know something about, that they've got some experience with? Is there going to be any other registrars in the organisation? So having some peers and having people at a similar level can be really helpful, and just help you feel supported at this point. You want to ask about, you know, what supervision's included, and how many hours of supervision are going to be included in the arrangement, who pays for it, and what happens if you need top-up hours, like if you need more than what they're going to give you. You probably want to ask some questions about, obviously, and this is a bit of a standard one, about making sure that the people they have there that are offering supervision are actually STAP approved clinical psychologists, and whether or not you get a say in who your supervisor is. In some cases you may, in other cases that might not be possible. And then you also want to ask about professional development and what is included in, again, the arrangement. Is it structured? What will it cover? Who pays for it, or how much do they pay for? So again, you know, aside from finding some organisations that, you know, hopefully have a good fit for you in terms of your values and your interests and helping you to see a wide variety of clients in those first couple of years, I'd be asking some of these questions in your interviews, so that, you know, when you're in a position like you are, you know, you're interviewing just as much as they're interviewing you.
Absolutely. All right, so in terms of the actual registrar requirements themselves, they're actually laid out quite clearly by the psychology board. So it's really important to actually go into that sort of on the front foot, knowing what those expectations are. So Vanessa, are you happy for me to just quickly whip through those and then we'll move forward?
Run through those, Aaron.
So it's a 3,000-hour program with the expectation that you're going to achieve 80 hours of supervision and 80 hours, and this is important, active CPD. And what makes CPD active is that there is an element of preparation for it and an element of assessment or challenge or somehow interacting with the material. Just sitting and watching a webinar doesn't actually count as active CPD. So that's really important to actually think about how are you going to meet your 80 hours, 3,000 hours, you'll rack that up in no time. But the real challenge is the 80 hours of supervision, because that's expensive, and the 80 hours of active CPD. There's a lot of passive CPD that's out there that's freely available. Finding active CPD is a bit more of a challenge. So they're the big targets that you need to keep in your mind.
And you really need to make sure that that CPD that you're doing as well, or the PD that you're doing, is specific for clinical psychology, because that's where your endorsement is. Absolutely. And that's where you really need to be targeting your CPD.
And if the board doesn't like it, they will bounce it back. So it's really important that you kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, you don't want to discover that afterwards. That's certainly something you want to know beforehand.
And Vanessa, you've outlined 3 ways that you can get it done.
Yep, so we've got the old-fashioned option, which if you are fortunate and lucky and end up in a position like, for example, working for the health department, you may have an organisation who actually puts that all on tap and has that built in. They've got the staff to do it. They have ongoing professional development activities, and they'll give you some external opportunities. So that one's, obviously a great option if you can get it. Unfortunately, I think fewer and fewer organisations are actually offering this now, and places with, places like Queensland Health or New South Wales Health are actually getting rarer and rarer to get, or you get them on a part-time basis. So you're still not going to get all of your your requirements met.
Or it's very focused and might not be in an area that you want. So I've just in the last couple of years, I've had a couple of registrars who have then moved into Queensland Health. They've decided, what, the private practice thing isn't for me, and they've gone into Queensland Health. But the positions that they've managed to land, one of them is working in renal transplant, because that's where they needed a clinical psychologist. Yeah. So she's very happy doing that, but it wasn't a case of, hey, we're looking for a clinical psychologist. We are looking for a renal transplant support psychologist. So that they are often very specific positions in health, and increasingly in education as well.
Yeah. The second option is really a do-it-yourself option, and you really you can go around, you can calculate the hours, you can seek out the supervisor, you can look for their availability, you can do all of the negotiating of rates, you can check their availability, you can organise payments, and as well as finding PD that's going to be pitched at the right level, and look, that way you certainly will. You have great control over that process. So you're going to be more likely, I guess, to get something that, is going to be really relevant to you and that you're really interested in, particularly from the PD side. The supervisor side is a little trickier, because you've got to find someone with availability and who's willing to take you on and all of that stuff. But certainly that's an option. And, lots of people do go down that pathway. The last option, of course, is to enroll in a registrar program. And obviously we have a registrar program, and I'll tell you a little bit about how it's structured. But of course, there's going to be other registrar programs that are out there that will cover some or all of your needs. But certainly there's a whole lot of benefits, I guess, to taking on that route. So if you use our prep program, for example, what does it include? Well, I guess it includes a whole range of different options, and that means that you still get some choice in that, because you might be in an organisation that says, hey, we can provide half of your PD and we can provide half of your supervision, but really, we need you to get the rest of it externally. And if you're in that position, then you can still access a program like PrEP and cover the bits that you're missing, use it to top up, I guess, to the level that you need. But we also cover a pretty extensive range, so we can actually cover all of your registration needs in that period. So certainly PrEP has the option of including up to all of the hours for CPD, and I guess we've picked a range of topics that we think are most suited, to clinical psychologists, but also to early career clinical psychologists. So we'll talk a little more detail about that in a second, but, we've sort of been working on that, and with, you have a variety of trainers with lots of experience, and, we've had some guinea pigs who've run through our program as well. So we've got to learn from some of our mistakes. You also have the option of course, getting, you can have up to 60 hours of individual supervision. And I think the other thing that's nice about, our program and potentially other prep programs is you can get some of that individual supervision done in small groups. Now, that gives you the opportunity, I guess, to continue to have peers and to have other people who are at your level of training and experience. And for me, I think that's probably one of the biggest bonuses. One of the things people get most out of their postgraduate training is, the group experience and being able to bounce ideas off other people. So having that done with an accredited STAP provider means that you get to have a team, even if you're working in an organization where you don't have a team. So that can just make it a little bit less lonely and a little less isolating, depending on the size of the place that you're working.
Really great point, Vanessa. Yeah. Cool.
I've already run through a few of these. We do have, but some of the things I haven't mentioned is, we're going to have online and offline options. Obviously, the beauty of COVID, it's forced us all into the technical age. So, you don't have to be based in Brisbane in order to access something like the prep program. You can do it online, but you can also do it in face-to-face if that's a preferred option. Then you don't have things like online, you miss the travel time and all sorts of bonuses like that. You don't get biscuits and cookies and snacks. That's the downside, obviously. Again, I think I've already talked about the group environment, but when it comes to costs, I guess, again, the thing about going into a program that's been put together, aside from the content, is that in terms of cost, you know exactly what you're going to be paying for. It's all very laid out. It's very transparent. And if you do the maths, and I'm sure Aaron will update you on the maths, he's better at this side than me, you'll see that it's very comparable. These are costs that you are going to need to be making anyway, and so it's very comparable to the do-it-yourself option. Do you want to add on that one, Aaron?
Look, we did the math, and we looked at how much people were paying for an entire registrar program. People are typically paying somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000, and that really depends on how expensive is your CPD and how expensive is your supervision. They're like the two really big drivers of cost in the registrar program. And our program, the complete program, comes in at $15,000, which, the monthlies, if you break that over 24 months or 20 months or whatever, that's a very affordable type of option. And it's comparable to what people are going to be paying out there in the general market anyway.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to take a second to highlight, because I know you're too humble to highlight this, Vanessa, but we are talking about a really highly experienced group of supervisors and trainers. So if you have a look on the prep website, you'll see the group of people who've put it together. You can Google any of us, and you can see that we're not fly-by-night people who have only been in the industry for a couple of years and thought this was a great idea. We're all people who've got a dedicated commitment to clinical training, and particularly early career training. So feel free to Google any of the people that you see on the website, and you'll see a long history of service to the profession, but also particular interest in training.
Yeah. No, we're really lucky, and we've got a really diverse team with, people who are specialised in working with young people who are doing a little more assessment. We're very, very fortunate that we've got a team with that breadth of experience as well, which I think is, I personally find really helpful. And of course, this can be integrated with your employing organization too. So, if you have I think this is probably one of the more exciting opportunities that it gives. If you're working in an area where you have an employer who would really love to take you on, but they just don't have the infrastructure. And I think this is particularly true for people who might be working in regional areas. They want to take someone on, but they just don't have the setup for it. We can certainly, link in, I guess, with organisers, with people's employment organisers, with your employer, to make that happen, so that they get the benefit, I guess, of taking on a registrar. Because I guess what we've found as a business, it's fantastic to be able to take on registrars, and not being able to do that because of the size of your organisation, it's a shame. So I think this provides a way around that dilemma.
Sorry, you go, Vanessa.
Oh, just to get into, I think this is probably the most exciting part of maybe even the presentation, what goes into the course. And well, it's exciting for us because we've worked really hard on it, and we find the topics, I think, really interesting and really practical and useful. So what we've really attempted to do with all of the training that we offer is to move between two things, looking in detail, because the detail is really important. I still remember coming out as a new psychologist, and the things I wanted to know were, what words do people use? How do people describe the confidentiality clause? How do other therapists start their sessions? Where do they put the emphasis? And I think what we've really tried to do is move between those basic level. We've been calling them advanced fundamentals, haven't we, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely.
And really digging into that really common stuff that comes up over and over again, and that it's great to get a good grounding in that first year, to really taking a much wider angle lens. So rather than really honing in on very particular therapeutic approaches, for example, like CBT, which I know a lot of university programs do, what we do is we really want to look at a lot of the commonalities that go across different ways of working with people, and doing a form of integration, I guess, so that we can take the best of some of those approaches, and use them with our clients, but using that in a really consistent and predictable and reliable sort of way. So we really, so we've come up with, I guess, what we think is a core curriculum that will add to that, and some of those topics are up on the screen there, developing shared goals and joint formulations. How do you work with someone who has been perhaps dragged into therapy and isn't so enthusiastic about being there, aka almost every adolescent that we see. Working with grief and loss, which is just something that as therapists, we did this topic just recently with our registrars, and no one had any training in this from their postgraduate degree, and yet almost all of our clients have some experience of grief and loss, and we really need to know how to recognize that and what to do with it in the therapy room.
So when you look at the curriculum, you'll probably find that it looks quite different to what you expect, because what people expect is a week on CBT for depression, a week on CBT for anxiety, a week on exposure therapy. We assume that you've got all of that stuff as part of your master's training. You're all well and truly on your way to being clinical psychologists. So where we're aiming is not that middle ground of the content of how to do therapy. We're aiming for the very granular detail that none of us ever talk about. And it's been one of the real innovations that we found with our registrars, is really getting into those details. But then also going to that next level, and when you're treating OCD using cognitive behavioral therapy or using ACT, how much of that is actually the same therapy with slightly different words, versus what are the slightly different nuances that each of these therapies actually bring to the table? So what we hope is that each person will walk out with a really solid core of skills that are common to all of the models, as well as those little satellite skills that are unique to some of the models and really add value, rather than just doing a lot of very repetitive theory-based or disorder-based content.
Yeah, we really want people to know how to do this stuff in the room and how to do it because I guess we come from a feedback informed focus. And what that means is, if we're asking clients, is this working? Do you like about it? And if we have clients who turn around and say, no, I really dislike CBT, like this isn't working for me. We want you to know how to respond to that and how to be able to pivot and feel confident in doing that. So that's really, I guess, the guts of it. And we have a huge list. I don't know how much, there's more detail about the specific topics available on the website. So you can always go and have a look at that, or you can get in touch to get some more information about the individual topics.
Now, I'm conscious that we've got questions coming up in a second, and Vanessa, we promised people a very brief presentation. We've already been talking for ages. So maybe this is a really good chance to, if everyone can maybe open up microphones and let's have a chat with each other about what are the questions at this point.
Well, I'll start, I guess. I still have my last placement to do, and then, so it's still a fair while away, but even saying that, it feels quite overwhelming, really, all the options, all the things to consider, and then also even thinking about joining a registrar program and all the things that you got to think about in terms of that, and finding the organization that suits me and things like that. But I really liked what you guys talked about in terms of kind of adding to what we've learnt and then going further and really perfecting those skills and the therapy in the room. It sounds really, really good. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Michelle. And you're right, it is really overwhelming at this stage. Most of us, my career was certainly defined in the first 5 years by just stumbling opportunistically from, people would wave a job at me. I'm like, oh, okay, let me go and do that.
That sounds interesting.
yeah, kind of. And I think you guys are in a much better, but also a much more challenging position, in that it's not a case of just jumping at whatever job is available and trying to piece together some skills along the way. You actually have to choose all of that, but you've got to choose it without necessarily having a full set of information in front of you. So yeah, I would imagine that is pretty overwhelming.
Is it all right if I talk? If I ask some question? I want to start with, I'm very, very sorry. I missed the first half of it. I think I got the times mixed up, which I'm very sorry about. So if anyone, if this has already been answered, please let me know. But I have some questions. I guess one of the first things that pops up for me is thinking about all the different costs, like the financial side of things, like how much is supervision going to cost, then how on top of that, how much is the professional development going to cost, and all of that sort of stuff as well, and how to budget for that, especially starting off professionally as well.
Yeah, look, that's it.
You go, Vanessa.
Sorry, Aaron, we're doing a great job of talking over each other there. Do you want to answer that one?
No, you go for it.
What I was going to say, Kim, is it really depends. It depends on which avenue you go down. It depends on which professional development you do. It depends on which supervisors you see. So you'll find that some supervisors, they really like to give back to the profession, and they'll offer slightly lower rates in terms of supervision, but you're probably still looking at, a minimum of about $180 an hour would be my guess, with lots of variability depending on who it is you want to see and what their availability is. And I guess one of the things we did maybe talk a little bit about before you joined us was just that I guess that's the pros and cons. You know, if you have a sort of a do-it-yourself approach, you've got to kind of work all of that out, and you've got to factor it in, and PD will cost you, some of it you'll get for free, and some of it you'll have to pay for, and some of it will be active, but then the other bits won't be active. So you've got to kind of weed through the stuff to make sure it's right. Versus, I guess, you know, even if you only do a part of a prep type of program, is that you know exactly what the costs are, you know what it is up front, and it sort of takes all the guesswork out of it, if you know what I mean. And, you know, you can look at those costs and actually then go, okay, well, if I was to do it this other way, I wonder what that would look like. Well, you can actually make some of those comparisons just by looking at training and supervision that's around at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's probably fair. 180 to 220 or so would be pretty normal out there for supervision per hour. Typically, people who are more expensive are doing that because, you know, they are the guru in whatever. And I'm a little bit suspicious of people who are doing it less than that. It feels like and I don't mean this in any negative kind of way, but I have had a number of supervisees who I've ended up picking up their registrar program because they found somebody who was going to do it for $120 an hour, but then they could never get an appointment with them because that person has, well, I've got a $200 client, or I could make time for you. And they're now 6 months in and they've only had 3 appointments. So, yeah, I don't know if that's a generalizable thing, but I've definitely had supervisees where that has been their experience, is that people who are doing it very cheaply haven't prioritized it as much as something else. That might not be true of everyone, but yeah, it's a great question.
Thank you very much.
And the cost of CPD, like how long's a piece of string? If you want to go and learn one of the pyramid scheme, Scrabble, you know, ABC models, that can be dozens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. Typically a couple of $100 an hour is not uncommon. You can find some really good stuff for a lot less than that as well. But it's really diabolical being stuck in a room with a trainer for 8 hours when you've paid $1,000 for it and it's bad. So it's hard to know what that's like without sort of having some contacts in the field. We've got time for a couple more questions if there's anything else that was sort of burning away at people's psyche there and desperate to have answered.
I do have a question. Thanks for sharing about the presentation. I was wondering, for the prep program, is there a specific start time? Like master typically start in February, and there's a ending time.
Yeah, one of the ways that we've really tried to capitalize on doing this is, we start everybody at the same time. And we do an intensive in that first week where we kind of give you, certainly not as bad as, master's pre-prac week, but we will do all of that really intensive stuff about the practical side of ethics in terms of, now that you're actually a fully registered psychologist, note-taking and what's going to happen when your notes get subpoenaed, and like all of those things that you can make big mistakes in early.
Risk assessment, we go back over that.
We kind of front load all of that, and we kick everyone off in February next year. And then it goes on weekly from there. So it really will be a case of there'll be a cohort of people who you all start with at once. You have this intensive experience with them at the beginning where you all do this work together, and then that will be your cohort going forward. And you'll have a small cohort of people in a peer supervision group with you from that same group. So we've designed it in that way that it does look a lot more like a master's. There is flexibility around that, but ideally it works in that cohort wave sort of fashion. It's another great question. You guys are really thinking hard about this stuff. I love it.
Sorry, I do have one more. Is it once like only in February, or is there like different time points within the year?
I'm gonna see if Rebecca can jump in there, because I'm really afraid of saying something that she's going to say I'm incorrect about. I'm wondering, is Rebecca Rebecca is there.
I can jump in, but I apologize that there's child noises in the background. Yeah, look, the idea is that we try to have most people start all together, and I think that's probably the best way to do it. However, of course, it's not going to work like that for everybody, because some people's thesis are taking a while to mark, or maybe they're a mid-year entry and they're going to finish in June, July. So absolutely someone could join us at a different point in time. They'd just be slightly out of phase. And so if you started, for instance, halfway through the first year and you're doing the 2-year program because you're a master's grad, you would probably finish up that whole first year, finish the second part of the first year, and then maybe wrap back around to some of them, or we could work something else out individually, because we have some flexibility here to make it work for what different people need in terms of the CPD. When it comes to the supervision, it really makes no difference, because you just get those hours over the course of 2 years. So it's only the CPD that has any of those elements, and it's not a big deal if you're out of phase.
We certainly want to do it in that cohort way, but we really don't want to disadvantage someone because, you know, their university struggled to find an international marker for their PhD and the whole thing dragged on for 3 months, or you had a baby and there was some maternity leave, or a whole range of life happens.
So many different things that can disrupt the program. And
typically a lot of life happens in those first couple of years of your career. So we're pragmatists about this stuff.
Thank you.
Cool. Are there any other questions, or are we heading towards wrapping up?
I wish I had a nice question for you guys. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking this is, look, it really does seem like a very good program, a very good presentation. I know one of the girls who's just done this program actually. And I think a program such as this would be so well, I think if they were partnered with more universities, if we had more programs like this and that had very strong partnerships with universities across Australia, it would really fill the space. This is very much an area that needs to be concentrated on, I think. It's a great idea. But anyway, I just wanted to say, yeah, it sounded awesome. So.
I completely agree with you, Tom. And I think it would just mean that as people finish up, they can just take that next step forward with a bit more confidence. Because otherwise, you know, I think people just feel like they've worked and worked and worked and worked, and then they're kind of on their own. And it'd be nice to have a kind of another step. It's not a compulsory step, obviously, but, you know, I guess a step to help launch people into that. So I can guarantee you we'll definitely be, I guess, reaching out to the universities. We sort of ran out of time this year just to do that, but I think we'll definitely take that up in the future.
And I agree with that completely. It's also something about us is that we don't like doing things that are all flash and show and have no substance. And the best way to do that is to scale slowly. So Rebecca, I think, first had this idea about 5 years ago. We've been doing registrar training for about 10 years at Benchmark. About 5 years ago, it all started to kind of coalesce and become a little bit more standardized. And then this year was our first year that we fully locked it down and went, right, what's the curriculum? We've got 4 registrars. They're all going through. What's the feedback? What are the things that we're screwing up? And we're confident now that the program is right enough that we can now do it with a larger external cohort. And when you guys find all of the things that we screw up, we will fix those. And then I'll feel really confident that the quality is good if we do 50 people or 100 people in the year after. It really is a case of learning as we go and learning as we grow. So yeah, I appreciate the comment, Tom, but I think that the thing that I'd be most afraid of is saying, hey, we've got this fantastic thing, and then a whole bunch of registrars have this really lousy experience because we scale up too quickly and can't deliver on what we promise. But we'd like to deliver on that in 2023.